Cuba and the European Union continue talks to develop political and commercial cooperation. The death toll in the Bahamas has risen to 45 as the government faces criticism from some sectors about their response to Hurricane Dorian. And floods in Morocco intensify, leaving destruction in their wake. Hello and welcome to Telesur. I'm Doris Polo in Quito, and this is From the South. Cuba and the European Union are discussing how to develop political and commercial cooperation in spite of the extension of the U.S. blockade against the island. The Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez and the EU's Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini are leading the talks.
The European Union is an important international partner for cooperation with Cuba. With them, we have developed agricultural programs, training to face climate change, and ways to modernize our economy. We have agreed to continue developing and advancing our cooperation to exploit mutually beneficial resources. We have also proposed bringing in other Global South countries to promote development in areas of great interest.
The European Union is the #1 trade partner and investor in Cuba, and we have tripled our cooperation in the past 2 years. We have gone from 15 million euros to 140 million euros currently. We have continued the dialogue on the situation and regional cooperation, and on Venezuela in particular. We also spoke, of course, about trade and investment. The European Union firmly rejects the full activation of the Helms-Burton Law by the United States government.
From Havana, our correspondent Alien Fernandez has more.
Here in the west of Havana, the talks have been going on at this second joint council between Cuba and the European Union. The European side is led by Federica Mogherini and the Cuban side by Bruno Rodriguez. The main talks have been behind closed doors, but we know that among the main issues discussed were trade and investment, which are important for both parties. And in this context, they have been analyzing how to confront together the effects of the United States Helms-Burton Law, which extends the US blockade of Cuba to third countries doing business with Cuba. A number of European countries have said they want to continue investing in Cuba, so they need to find a way of dealing with this US legislation. Some of them have already adopted their own legislation to mitigate the effects of the Helms-Burton. This joint council was set up as a result of the political and cooperation agreement, which was signed between Cuba and the EU in 2016, and which came into effect the following year. The council had its first meeting in Brussels last year.
That was Alien Fernandez with that report. The head of the Venezuelan Strategic Command has rejected accusations in the Colombian weekly Semana that Venezuela's armed forces are supporting Colombian guerrillas. On Twitter, Remigio Cabellos showed how the magazine had used a standard military order to increase the supply of basic goods in border states to claim that these were for the ELN and FARC dissident. Ceballos said the Venezuelan armed forces are combating Colombian armed groups in the border region on a daily basis. The Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza said this fake news in Semana fitted into what President Nicolas Maduro has warned of in recent days. The attempt by Colombia to fabricate incidents on the border as a way of justifying military action against Venezuela. Arreaza told the diplomatic corps in Caracas that Venezuela is determined to prevent such a conflict.
They have returned once again to the path of war or aggression. They are looking for false flag operations, not just in Colombia itself, against ordinary campesinos and working people who they kill and then present as guerrillas from this or that armed group. Now they are looking for such operations as a pretext for war between Colombians and Venezuelans, who are one single people. That would be a historic mistake, and we want to prevent it by all means possible.
In other news, a national day of mourning is to be declared in the Bahamas, days after Hurricane Dorian tore through parts of the island chain. Residents are taking stock of the destruction left behind as the government finds ways to confront what has been referred to as unprecedented devastation. Video of Marsh Harbor in the Abaco Islands, the worst hit by the hurricane, shows widespread damage with the harbor, workplaces, hospitals and even the airport damaged or completely decimated. The official death toll has risen to 45, but is expected to increase even more as hundreds of thousands remain missing. In his next address to the nation, the Prime Minister is set to designate a day marked by mourning, while also issuing an order for flags to be flown at half-mast. Meanwhile, rescue workers continued their grim search for bodies and survivors in the hurricane-ravaged Bahamas on Monday. Relief agencies are also working around the clock to deliver food and supplies over flooded roads and piles of debris. Dorian was one of the most powerful Caribbean storms on record, rampaging over the Bahamas for nearly 2 days, becoming the worst disaster in the nation's recorded history. But there has been criticism of the official response to Hurricane Dorian, especially in Abaco, which took the brunt of the storm. Both survivors and some of the international media have called it slow. The Bahamas National Emergency Management Agency, NEMA, responded to some of the criticism in its latest briefing on Sunday evening. It said 3,500 people have been evacuated from Abaco to Nassau so far. The NEMA spokesperson said evacuations are voluntary and that they should be free. This comes after some residents complained that private airlines had been charging to take victims off the island. Haiti and Puerto Rico are also sending help to the Bahamas. Our correspondent in Santo Domingo, Daisy Toussaint, has the details.
It is still a chaotic situation in northern Bahamas, 1 week after Hurricane Dorian brought devastation. The number of confirmed dead has risen to 45, according to the Royal Bahamas Police Force. But many are still missing, and the police have appealed to relatives to file missing persons reports. Thousands are also waiting to be evacuated from the worst-hit islands of the Abaco and Grand Bahama. CARICOM countries are offering help. Trinidad and Tobago is sending troops to help the affected communities. This Monday, the Minister of National Security, Stat Young, is accompanying the head of Defense Force and 100 soldiers to the Bahamas. Haiti and Puerto Rico have also announced assistance. A Haitian delegation has already traveled to Abaco with basic necessities for the Haitian citizens who live there. There are estimated to be about 70,000 Haitians living in the Bahamas. For her part, the mayor of San Juan in Puerto Rico says they have sent a medical team, including 2 doctors, paramedics, and rescue personnel to help the search and recovery efforts. On Twitter, the chairman of CARICOM, Alan Chestnut, said the Caribbean community stands in full solidarity with the people of the Bahamas and will do everything possible to help them overcome this tragedy.
The U.S. president has said his administration must be very careful to make sure refugees allowed entrance from the Bahamas have the proper documentation. This, as he said, very bad people would be among them. Trump's comments follow the harsh enforcement of visa restrictions for Bahamian refugees, with many this weekend being forced off boats that were taking them to Miami.
So we're also recovering from a hurricane, but we have to be very careful. Everybody needs totally proper documentation because the Bahamas had some tremendous problems with people going to the Bahamas that weren't supposed to be there. I don't want to allow people that weren't supposed to be in the Bahamas to come into the United States, including some very bad people and some very bad gang members and some very, very bad drug dealers.
Shifting gears now, the Trinidad and Tobago Fishermen and Friends of the Sea, FFOS, are calling on Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley to ensure their protection through improved legislation. A small group gathered at the Queen's Park Savannah near the Prime Minister's office as they protested armed with placards. This comes as 7 fishermen were killed in July by local pirates who ordered them to jump into the sea, stealing their boats and engines. Criticizing the government's response to the fishermen's deaths, The FFOS took a letter to the Prime Minister outlining their demands.
That is not something that we are asking for. That is a mandatory requirement. And we are asking that the Attorney General come down from his high office and meet with us to discuss the critical need of updating our legislation so that it can work in compatibility with national security legislation to create safety at sea. Because these are critical matters of life and death. And the government is locking us out and treating us like hoodlums. And this must stop now. We are asking politely, in God's name, we are asking Dr. Rowley, with all of the respect due to his office and to his cabinet and to his government, to recognize that people are suffering in silence.
We'll take a short break now. When we come back, we'll tell you about a Chilean teen who is the first person to legally change genders in the country. Join us again in a minute. Welcome back. The Intercept investigative news site released new leaked conversations on Sunday. They show how Brazilian prosecutors tried to prevent the former president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, from being appointed a minister in the government of Dilma Rousseff. In private chats, the prosecutors in the Lava Jato case recognized that they were acting illegally when they recorded phone conversations between Lula and Rousseff. But they felt it was more important to prevent the appointment, which would have meant that investigations of Lula would have passed to the Supreme Court. They wanted them to stay with lower-level courts where they had more chance of making sure he would be jailed. Our correspondent, Brian Meyer from Sao Paulo, has the details.
New revelations by The Intercept and Folha de São Paulo reveal that in 2016, at a moment before the impeachment procedure went underway, Judge Sergio Moro from the Lava Jato task force was illegally colluding with members of the prosecution team and the federal police to wiretap conversations between the president of the country and former President Lula, even though they'd been ordered to stop. Now, these leaked conversations, which have been now published in the Brazilian media, show that Chief Prosecutor Delton Dallagnol knew that what they were doing was illegal and admitted it and said it didn't matter because it was a political move. They also show that the federal police agent who was providing the play-by-play of every conversation underway was promoted to federal police superintendent in Paraná State by Sergio Moro after he became Bolsonaro's justice minister. And finally, they show that the actual conversations that were taking place prove that what the media was saying at the time about Lula accepting this position to get out of being prosecuted was actually the opposite. Lula was afraid the media would spin it to make it look like he was trying to avoid arrest, when in fact he went ahead and did it anyway, according to his own words, because he was worried that there was a coup underway and that his entrance into the Dilma Rousseff administration might be able to stop it. So after this information came out, former President Dilma Rousseff has publicly demanded that the 2016 impeachment be cancelled due to the crimes that were committed leading up to it by the Lava Jato team.
That was Brian Meyer with that report. A Chilean teen has become the first person to legally change gender in the country. In 2016, 14-year-old Catalina began to identify as a boy among family and friends. But it took about 3 years for Chile's conservative Roman Catholic legal system to legally acknowledge the gender change. Now known as a boy, Alexis requested his first government-issued identification card after a change in the civil registry and on his birth certificate. In 2018, President Sebastián Piñera signed into law a bill allowing people over the age of 14 to change their gender and name in official records.
Yes, it's hard being transgender. It's difficult because in many families, their children have expressed themselves or have made their transition, but their families have casted them aside. They have been thrown away. They turned their backs on them, and they have had to forge ahead. And in schools, the same. I know trans friends, and it was not so easy for them because discrimination still exists.
An increase in the prices of gasoline and diesel has taken effect in Barbados. From midnight Sunday, gasoline and diesel there has seen an increase of 3 cents per litre and 6 cents per litre respectively. Kerosene, on the other hand, has decreased by 1 cent per litre. The government says these price adjustments are in keeping with its policy of allowing retail prices to be reflective of those on the international market. The Guyana Elections Commission will meet on Tuesday to discuss the possibility of fresh elections being held in March next year. That's more than a year after the government was defeated by a motion of no confidence. The March 2020 election date proposal was presented on Friday by the Elections Commission. However, there is no consensus between the two political sides represented on that body. Opposition-aligned commissioners have said the proposal could not be accepted and reiterated the call for the polls to be held as early as possible. Nicaragua's first international tourism fair, Nicatur 2019, has opened in the capital Managua. It seeks to invite tourists from around the world to visit the country.
In the Olaf Palme Convention Center in the city of Managua, the first international tourism fair, Nicatur 2019, was inaugurated. The objective of the fair is to promote the tourism sector in Nicaragua. More than 30 countries were invited to the event to establish agreements that benefit the tourism sector in Nicaragua. The event was hosted by the co-director of the Tourism Institute, Anasha Campbell, who welcomed all delegations that were present.
In the name of the people and the government of Nicaragua, and in the name of the Tourism Institute in Nicaragua, we welcome you all to this land of lakes and volcanoes, and to this international tourism fair. Nicatur has an objective to be a platform to promote Nicaragua as a national and international destiny. We also want to welcome businessmen who want to promote and market their goods and services.
One of the touristic zones that Nicatur 2019 is promoting is the Laguna de Apoyo Natural Reserve. It has a history of close to 23,000 years in a volcano that, after it erupted, transformed into a lagoon. The mineral properties that this lagoon contains is what makes it tourist visited.
The Laguna de Apoyo is an important touristic destination. It has been operating as a tourism destination for 12 to 15 years. But since 2005, the flow of national or international tourists has increased. As you can see, this beautiful crater was created as a result of the explosion of the Apoyo volcano.
Wholesalers, service providers, national and international tourists enjoy the first edition of the fair that seeks to promote touristic zones like the Volcán Masaya National Park with the support of the small and medium company.
Egypt's Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry has called for more global support behind Sudan's new civilian-led government. This, as he said, Egypt supports Sudan's removal from the United States list of countries sponsoring terrorism. Washington's harsh measures were imposed for Khartoum's alleged support for extremist militant groups in 1993, when Osama bin Laden resided in Sudan between 1992 to 1996. Shoukry said Cairo is now working with Washington to end Sudan's international pariah status. Shoukry is in Khartoum for a one-day visit to hold talks with top officials in what Egypt hailed as a new start in relations between the neighbors as Sudan transitions towards civilian rule.
Egypt is working using its communication and partnerships with various powerful countries, including the United States and some European and African countries, to remove Sudan, especially after all the changes that happened, from the terrorism list.
Former militant leader Riek Machar has arrived in South Sudan for talks with the president over the implementation of a stalled peace deal. Machar's rare visit comes before a November deadline to form a power-sharing government, a key part of the pact signed by the two rivals last year. The pact was meant to end a civil war that killed hundreds of thousands of people and displaced a third of the country's population. South Sudan split from Sudan in 2011 after decades of war, but plunged into its own conflict at the end of 2013 after the President Salva Kiir sacked Machar as vice president. Coming up, the suspension of the UK Parliament will begin soon. Details after this. 17 people were killed in Morocco when floodwaters overturned a bus in the kingdom's southeast on Sunday. Rescue workers are continuing the search for survivors. Morocco has been hit by violent storms this summer, sparking flash floods in its mountainous interior. At the end of August, a flood hit a football pitch, killing 8 people in Trinidad. Protesters in the Timbuktu region in Mali are continuing demonstrations, blocking the road leading to the main airport to demand the restoration and security of the thoroughfare. The road links the Malian city to the center and the south of the country. Various social movements have been blocking national roads in recent weeks to make demands and protest against what they claim to be false promises by the government.
It's the entrance to Timbuktu airport that we have closed. And until our complaints are resolved, this door will remain closed. No one will come in and no one will come out.
Until now, the regional capital Timbuktu has not been linked to its national capital, Bamako. So these are really noble claims. We want a road. A road is development. Without roads, there is no development. Without roads, it's insecurity and all that goes with it.
Pope Francis has addressed youth unemployment and social inequalities during a mass in Mauritius on the last leg of his Africa trip. Tens of thousands of people attended the service in the capital, Port Louis. About 1 in 4 young Mauritians are unemployed, and the income gap between social classes has widened since the global economic crisis in 2008. Another reason behind the Pope's visit is to pay tribute to Jacques Désiré Laval, a 19th century French priest who helped former enslaved people.
Amen.
The 5-week suspension of the British Parliament will soon begin after MPs are expected to once again reject calls for a snap election. When parliamentary business stops, it would mean that lawmakers cannot sit, debate or pass laws until October 14th. It also means less time for the opponents of Prime Minister Boris Johnson to stop his Brexit plan. Ahead of this, Johnson travelled to Dublin for his first meeting with Ireland's leader, who warned of the consequences of the border backstop's removal without an adequate replacement.
That the House do now adjourn.
Meanwhile, Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of Britain's opposition Labour Party, has accused the Prime Minister of running away from scrutiny over the Parliament shutdown.
I think it's disgraceful. Parliament should be sitting and Parliament should be holding the government to account, and the Prime Minister appears to be wanting to run away from questions. He was appointed Prime Minister at the end of July. He's faced one Prime Minister's question time, and now he's proroguing Parliament so there will not be a PMQs this Wednesday. I think it's disgraceful, but also all MPs need to be able to question the government on its proposal to crash out on the 31st of October from the European Union, with all the problems that will mean for food and medicine supplies.
British Airways pilots have commenced a 2-day strike, grounding nearly all of its flights and disrupting thousands of passengers in a dispute over pay. The airline, part of the International Airlines Group, cancelled 1,700 flights to and from London's Heathrow and Gatwick airports. The pilots are demanding profit sharing as part of the pay deal. This despite being offered a 11.5% salary increase over the past 3 years. That brings us to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Doris Polo. Thank you for watching.